I need to begin by taking a bit of a poll so that I know where we're at. Who in here, thanks Gary, who in here watches TV? Okay, great. Whose preference is that a show ends on a cliffhanger? And who likes a nice, clean resolution? Okay, great. So recently, Freddie and I were embroiled in a series, and every episode ended on the worst cliffhanger. And it got so frustrating to us that what we started doing was watching the next show's first 10 minutes so that we could see the resolution. And then we would say, okay, now it's time for bed. We'll pick it up tomorrow. And it was like, this is how we dealt with whatever, the industry's awareness that if you end on a cliffhanger, it keeps you completely hooked in and you'll basically never stop watching the show. Not so with today's Parsha, which in some ways ends with a nice, clean resolution. In fact, you might say there are 3 resolutions, one in chapter 48, one in chapter 49, and one in chapter 50. So the ending of the book of Bereshit, of Genesis, has us having the loose ends that have been opened throughout this book in some ways resolved. And it felt appropriate at the turn of the Gregorian calendar to talk a little bit about closure, about the nature of tying up loose ends. And when things are unresolved, and often they're unresolved for things that are beyond our control, what is it that we can do to tell a story that gives us some sense of closure? I want to look at the 3 chapters that are at the end of Bereshit and the different versions of closure that we get, and think about how this might apply to our own lives as we enter into the year of 2024. Feels like the Jetsons or something. So in the chapter 48, we get a resolution to the story of Jacob and Joseph through the children, Ephraim and Manasseh. In this chapter, we also get the formula that's said at the beginning of the blessing that you give children on Shabbat evening. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. Yisimcha Elohim Ephraim u'Manasseh. And the roles, the age order of Ephraim and Manasseh are once again flipped here. And in some sense, as I've certainly spoken of in the past, this is the meta story of the family of Israel, that consistently it is the younger child who is sort of overpowering of the older. And that is certainly Jacob's story and his relationship with Esau. And it has again been Joseph's story in his family unit. And now, for another generation, Jacob, the grandfather, cements that this inverted relationship between age and the one who will actually rule over the other will be the story of this family. And what's so remarkable about this moment is that Joseph actually tries to interrupt this. As he notices that Jacob has reversed his hands, putting his right or stronger hand over the younger child, Joseph says, oh, Dad, you got it wrong. You got to flip your hands back and put the blessing on the correct child. And Jacob looks at him and says, no, I'm doing it right. And this for us should stand out. It's remarkable that all of the pain that has been caused by reversals of birth order has also finitely been noted here to be a source of blessing. It's the drama of the story. And in a sense, what Jacob is saying here to his son is, I'm sorry, but it has to be this way. And this should be instructive for us, that on one level, this story of, inversions has been repeatedly a source of struggle. And yet, Jacob decides once and for all that this will continue to be the story of this family. Then, in chapter 49, the next chapter, which we read from today, we have the blessings of each of the children. And as each of the children are blessed, a theme sort of emerges, which seems to be that some children are better than others. There's no better way to say it. He does favor certain characteristics and qualities that he seems to think will be good, and other characteristics and qualities that he finds troubling. And like I asked before we read this chapter, whether it's prophetic or more of a mirror that he holds up to each of them, we might imagine for ourselves how taking a moment to reflect on our good and bad characteristics and qualities is an essential part of growth and self-improvement. And so it doesn't have to be that in these blessings, Jacob is giving his children some kind of prophetic statement about who they will become, but rather, if you don't like your blessing, what are you going to do to make it different as you grow and as your people become a tribe of their own? The other thing that happens in chapter 49 is a resolution is actually made that you might not have noticed, which is that throughout the story of Jacob, we've wondered which of the children is actually going to be the leader of this family. And importantly, it's not Joseph. Joseph is favored and chosen and special in all of these ways, but it is really Yehuda who is given the mantle of leadership for this family of Israel, for Bnei Yisrael. Yehuda and his quality of teshuvah, his ability to return to his failures and turn them into something that will be a blessing for himself and for others, is the quality that we mark for leadership within this family. And we see the resolution of that in chapter 49, where Yehuda's blessing is the blessing of being the one in the family who will hold leadership. Then in chapter 50, we have this transitional moment for our whole people's story. We've resolved the sibling issue. We've resolved the question of family leadership. And now we have to understand what will be the fate of this people. And that is where Joseph is told, Joseph, who has been told that God is going to take notice of us in this land, and we will, in fact, ultimately be returned to the land that our ancestors were promised. He makes the sons of Israel swear to carry his bones up from Egypt when his life comes to an end. And this is, in a sense, this meta story of how the people are going to both remain in this exile and also carry, literally, this promise of return. And it takes many hundreds of years for this moment of Joseph's bones being disinterred and carried back to the land. But as I said, I think last week, it is Serach bat Asher who the Midrash, the rabbis, imagine that this daughter, this grandchild of Jacob's, is the one who ultimately leads the people to Joseph's bones so that they can be carried back up to the land. And what I want to notice about all three of these stories is that, no doubt, these are conclusions. They say, in a sense, this is where we are and where we have been, and therefore this is the point at which our departure will go from, where we will continue to travel forward. We will now know, we have in our back pocket, that Judah will be the head of this family, that younger children will almost inevitably overpower their older siblings. Sorry for any youngest in the room. It's just the way the story falls out. And that in fact, the people will be in this cycle of dispersion and return. Now, those are all beautiful, nice endings. If I was watching this as a TV show, I might click it off and go to bed and say, what an incredible story. And what I want us to realize is this is not the end of the story. The next chapter opens and immediately there's a disruption in the narrative. Immediately, any sense of peace and calm that has been is turned upside down. As we are told, a new Pharaoh arose and he did not know Yosef, and all of the loyalty and the comfort and the sense of peace that were given at the end of this book is immediately snuffed out. However, The promise was not that these things would come to be immediately. The promise was that there would be an inevitability of a process that we would go through as humans. And that is what I want us to consider at the turn of the year. That in a sense, prophecy or promise, we always actually have to live out the things that come next. We can never skip any of the chapters of our lives. When we're suffering, we still have to move through that. When things are amazing, we should enjoy and appreciate them for what they are and not rush or fear that will inevitably come to some failure on the other side. And so I want us to take a leaf out of the book of Genesis, and at this turn of the year, take a moment to pause and appreciate the stories that have come to some conclusion over the course of this year. Mark them, hold them. Imagine that they're a point that you depart from as you create new stories in the year to come. And do not fear, because no story, as we learn, is actually ever over. It's our job as humans to continue to live, to literally, as we say in our tradition, choose life in every moment and in every day. And from that place, as we write new stories, we write them with the knowledge that we can always take a moment to step back and appreciate what has been and to reset that goodness as a starting point from which we depart into our future. So I hope that can be a blessing for each of you in this year ahead. And we'll continue our davening on page 184.